And for that storm I had to prepare myself, primarily for the pre-abitur exams that would take place within the next weeks. But just like the real exams, they were of utmost significance, so sufficient preparation was inevitable. They heavily influenced the direct part of our final result, consisting of those 3 school years, 11 to 13. The main abitur itself represented the second, more direct grade. Regarding those 2 separate marks, we had our result appearing as a 2-digit number separated by a comma. 1,0 was the best, and as far as I knew, 4,3 the worst. So the worst in the sense of the lowest degree possible without failing. Otherwise, one had to repeat all year 13. And for I was not that looking forward to do that, I better prepared myself appropriately. So on that first day I introduced myself again to the topic of vocabulary. Since I was using it all the time in case I spoke, it was not that dramatic to catch up with things. I mean, we didn't do anything else in our lessons except writing, practicing, asking questions and so on. I knew that from the time at the beginning of year 13, when our English teacher gave us a short preview on the year. And well, it was really short, because she only said a couple of words. We are going to continue like the 12th year has ended. We started to practice grammar quite early, I think in grade 6, so there was a lot of space to fill in all those topics later on. Only logical that eventually the point came at which we had nothing left except for applying all that. But it was very convenient to that extent, according to which we were able to ask questions and fortify the structures and rules properly, so that it was anchored within us when the real test came. Biology and computer science were a whole another story, because they definitely had some topics left, which I undoubtedly missed while I was in hospital. So that was the crucial part. After all, my schedule consisted not only of 3 main subjects, I also had the subordinate subjects, like history, chemistry, physics, physical education, PE, art lessons, religion, and so on, which also required to catch up with, as they were less significant, but also instrumental for the first part of the grade, together with the pre-abitur. But all that was stuff for the close future. For the moment, I only wanted to build a solid ground to stand on, to get a feeling for learning, so to say. Besides, I couldn't focus on that all the time anyway, because later that day, after dealing 2 hours intensively with language, I couldn't avoid to recall the recent past. It just popped into my mind. School was the aspect laying further afar in the past and in the future, while my hospital residence represented the more current situation. And my task was it mainly to merge them and build my routine around them. To put it short, I couldn't live with only going to school, but neither with solely visiting Chloe. That was the compromise I had to live with. And regarding second, I had an idea coming forth, which promised me being able to do that with more ease. Even though neither I was able to visit her, nor she to visit me, we could meet on a more neutral spot. To be honest, that was my idea right from the start, when she informed me about that she didn't own a cell phone. And now that idea would come to fruition, because according to my plan, I went to the local phone store and just bought one for her, so that she was connected somehow. Sure, such a phone, even when you choose the cheapest one, was not exceptionally affordable, but as I've learned, some things, people, just negate the value of money, because they turn out to be more valuable than any amount of money could ever be. So subsequently my intention was clearly settled. In the evening of the same day I drove to the city, in which I remembered a favorably located phone store to investigate offers and prices. I had a little margin on my side, since I had quite a significant sum of money saved. But to compare and aim for the best possible deal, I consulted one of the staff members. I told them that I was looking for an affordable device, up to €100, about $109, as well as a mobile contract for it to work properly. As a result, they showed me different phones and different deals they wanted to sell, from which 1 or 2 were quite likable right away from the beginning. I had a not too shabby phone and a contract, which was also viable, so I chose the better one among those offerings and paid the €105 for once. The contract itself had to be paid monthly in order to work, which meant an extra sum of roughly 10 euros. But altogether, it was so worth it. Further, I only had to hand it to her when I visited, which was planned for the day after the following. For the day in between, I intended on working hard, so that I was slightly freer on the day I drove to the hospital. After all, I didn't want to leave after 1 or 2 hours already. As long as I was able to handle it that way, I welcomed it. So with my plan extended, I went back home to get some rest. Unlike the time inside the hospital, I was out and about all day, which was also one thing to get used to again. So to say, as a precursor to my new routine, going to school, going home, learning, then doing other duties, and so on. And also exchanging messages with Chloe, what I truly craved for most. Corresponding to that, when I got home, I played through millions of scenarios inside my head as to how she'd probably react. That clearly had priority and hence made sleeping redundant. I went to bed quite early with the following day of work in my mind. It was about 11 p.m. when I finished watching my relaxation video, so to say, that brought me to bed. That was mostly consisting of 1 or 2 episodes of the series I was currently watching. And well, the fact that one of those episodes depicted a couple coming together out of nowhere, so to say, fueled my mind with finest ideas. But unlike usually, when I tried to sleep while switching thoughts in intervals of 10 seconds each, it was a more than pleasant restlessness. I fantasized about the moment we saw each other again, the topics we would talk about, and first and foremost, her reaction to the present I have prepared. Altogether, it gave me occasion to pass 2 hours with not even the slightest intention to sleep. But transferred to the evenings lately, I had to admit that lying in bed and thinking had almost become a routine already. One I was not willing to lay aside, since it connected me with Chloe, even only conceptually. Briefly explained, the mere thought of being close to her, and then the fact for that to happen soon, inspired me and gave me motivation ad infinitum. And for everything has 2 sides, positive and negative. The negative was that I needed 3 hours to finally get close to the state you call sleep. So when I woke up, it was quite late compared to my normal wake-up time. Though that was not the only strange thing. Of course, I had to orientate myself toward my current location, since my familiar home had become foreign to some extent. But when I did that, I looked for that black object, which gave me always information on where I was until then. I'm talking about Chloe's black shimmering hair, with which I connected deeply the sensation of safety, the perfection of the moment, and also the warmth that is emanated by love. The typical psychological principle of priming. When you see something or someone, you will have a certain thought or attitude towards that thing or person. And priming is called the phenomenon to change that on purpose. In my case, I'm referring to the change from shock and embarrassment as I saw myself next to her for the first time, to absolute romantic ecstasy, which was then later the case. So to be honest, it felt a little bit off when my search revealed itself to be in vain. But once again, I rectified that by creating a mental image of us being together in that very moment. So in some way, we were both laying close to each other inside my bed. I never thought that thoughts could compete with reality to that degree, not gonna lie. Even though it was only a few minutes, I perceived my mind games becoming an entirely new reality, a reality more real and palpable than everything being picked up by physical senses. But very soon the reality dealing with school knocked on my door and reminded me of my plan I established on the past day. Sure, it was kind of a torture for me, kind of useless at first glance, but in the bigger picture it had to be done to avoid getting into any trouble. For the sake of myself and everyone. So I finished my mental love story and made my way to my desk to begin repeating the learned English vocabulary and grammar to fortify it. Afterwards, I had to deal with other stuff, which wasn't a little either, so I quickly tore myself together and began. Solely English took at least 2 hours from the clock, which means it was already afternoon when I started to focus on biology. That little lunch break I interrupted my learning process with was very contributive, since I managed to regenerate my concentration and motivation at least a bit. The subject itself was awesome, evaluated by its topics, but there were so many terms and definitions that needed to be learned. That was only comprehensible, since otherwise no one had a clue what you were talking about when you would start describing the descriptions, proverbially spoken. But after all, it didn't spare me from learning, so I surmounted myself a second time. The entire year 13 so far had to be reproduced, since luckily the pre-abitur only required knowledge in terms of the same year. The real abitur instead 3 years. But however, beginning from the transition to this year, which concluded with the topic of last year, genetics, not one of my favorites, I admit, I had to refresh primarily the facts about the seeing mechanism and how it works, with all the little details the human eyes own. Fortunately, a fellow student gave me already the sheets and texts we composed throughout my abstinence, so I could just get to work. One of the advantages I see in technology, which comes with social media, WhatsApp, and so on. The comfortable transfer of materials by just taking a picture, because that made the driving around and asking for it redundant, provided that student had a certain amount of self-organization. Otherwise, I had a problem and wouldn't even know.